tragically lost the love of your life 3 years ago fighting to prove that he is your child's biological father. Brother is not the father, and you claim you have more than enough evidence to prove Ms. Cameron is lying, trying to receive death benefits she is not entitled to.
My mom would have liked to be here today as well, but she's very distraught, and she just couldn't face it to come. We lost him, and just the whole situation of her getting pregnant, it just doesn't add up. She already receives the benefits for one child, and the other one, with the dates not adding up, I just feel that she's just not trying to work.
Yes, because his father's name is not on this birth certificate.
Is it Malachi?
Yes.
Is not entitled to death benefits?
No, because they said I have no proof of him being his son because he passed when I was 12 weeks pregnant.
There are moments in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom when the air feels heavier than truth itself. Moments when a DNA test becomes more than a scientific report and turns into a doorway people regret taking, because the truth changes everything. Today is one of those moments. Families arrive not for drama, but for survival. The courtroom becomes a stage in a divorce case, an emotional arena where the fragile relationship between law and justice is exposed, debated, and painfully clarified. The testimonies echo like the raw honesty of a podcast, unfiltered, undeniable, and what happens next will reshape lives permanently. When the parties step forward in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the tension between them is visible before a single word is spoken. They have been living in uncertainty for months, some for years, and the court has become the only place they believe the truth will finally stand still long enough to be understood. The judge listens carefully, ready to navigate the complex layers of personal history, accusations, timelines, and emotional claims that have brought everyone to this point. Her role is not just to determine biological facts, but to interpret human behavior, weigh credibility, and apply justice in the most compassionate way possible. In her courtroom, the concept of justice in jurisprudence becomes personal, shaped by the stories unfolding in front of her. The first parties present themselves with shaky voices, grief lingering in the way they speak about the man who passed away. The mother, Ms. Cameron, stands before Judge Lauren Lake with deep sadness in her eyes. She explains that she lost her partner while she was still early in her pregnancy, leaving her without the chance to secure his signature on the birth certificate. The judge listens closely as she explains how she has struggled to prove her child's right to support, including the eligibility for death benefits. Without his name recorded, she has been denied every form of financial assistance tied to his passing. It is more than money. It is recognition, dignity, and acknowledgement that the father she loved truly belonged to the child she now raises alone. But the father's family, particularly his sister, Ms. Melvin, enters the courtroom with a different conviction. She believes that Ms. Cameron is using her brother's death for personal gain, attempting to claim benefits she is not entitled to. She presents a series of concerns, timelines, and memories she believes point to infidelity. She shares what her brother told her during one difficult period of their relationship, and she insists that the dates surrounding the pregnancy simply do not align with what she knows as the truth. Her testimony reveals deep pain not only about the child's paternity, but also about losing her brother and the unanswered questions that lingered after his passing. The judge asks questions with care, exploring each part of the story. She examines the evidence, including the birth certificate, medical timelines, signed statements, and family testimonies. She notes inconsistencies, but also acknowledges the emotional pressure under which these memories were formed. The judge understands how trauma distorts timelines and how grief sharpens suspicion. What she needs, however, is clarity, and only the DNA test can bring that level of certainty. Yet the DNA test becomes more complicated because the father is deceased. Instead, a surviving grandparent's DNA is used, creating a statistical interpretation of biological relationships. The judge explains the science clearly, making sure both sides understand what the results mean and that they carry legal significance. The courtroom becomes quiet as everyone waits, wondering whether the truth will finally bring healing or create deeper divides. This moment is not unlike the high-stakes conversations discussed in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast or the Divorce Course podcast, where legal battles mix with personal pain and where evidence must meet emotion on equal terms. The results confirm a biological relationship, validating the mother's claim and granting the child his rightful recognition. The judge, always committed to balancing the relationship between law and justice, reminds the family that the child deserves love and support regardless of past conflicts. The emotional release is overwhelming. Tears, relief, apologies, and quiet forgiveness unfold naturally between the families. It is a moment that resembles the heart of Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where truth leads not only to closure but unexpectedly to reconciliation. In the next case, Judge Lauren Lake faces a returning set of parties with a long and dramatic history. This time, the courtroom feels heavier with frustration, exhaustion, and repeated mistakes. Ms. Austin arrives overwhelmed and visibly disappointed in herself for being back in court again, carrying yet another child whose paternity is in question. The judge sees the sadness beneath her nervous smile and immediately addresses it. This is no longer about one mistake, but a pattern that continues to harm the children at the center of the conflict. Mr. Wallace stands across from her, equally defensive and visibly agitated. He has doubts about the child's paternity and he presents his reasons. Suspicions, phone records, and patterns of behavior he interprets as signs of unfaithfulness. Their relationship is chaotic, constantly shifting between separation, reconciliation, and new betrayals. The judge recognizes the cycle instantly. It is the kind she has seen countless times in full episodes of court proceedings, where partners become locked in destructive patterns, unable to break free even when the damage becomes obvious. As the judge listens, the arguments escalate. The emotions overwhelm the courtroom, resulting in another woman being removed after a heated exchange. The judge pauses the session to regain order, emphasizing that the dignity of the court must be maintained no matter how chaotic their personal lives have become. Her authority restores silence, but the emotional residue remains in the room. Both parties express their regrets differently. Ms. Austin cries because she recognizes her mistakes, yet feels trapped by them. Mr. Wallace grows defensive and angry, feeling judged and unheard. The judge sees through both facades. She understands that people often regret taking a DNA test not because they fear the truth, but because the truth reveals patterns they have avoided confronting. The results do more than determine paternity. They expose the nature of a relationship and force both parties to accept how their choices led them here. When the DNA test confirms Mr. Wallace as the biological father, the judge does not let the moment become celebratory. Instead, she shifts the focus to accountability. She calls in a social worker via video call, creating a bridge between legal outcomes and healing opportunities, an approach emphasized in many modern legal discussions, including those in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast. The goal is not simply to assign responsibility, but to help the family break their destructive cycle and build a stable environment for their children. The judge firmly insists on counseling, parenting classes, and emotional support systems to prevent future turmoil. In another emotional case, the court sees a grieving aunt and a young mother caught in a painful dispute. The aunt, Ms. Sherman, is torn between love and doubt. She desperately wants the child to be her deceased brother's, especially because the loss is still fresh and unbearable. The mother, Ms. Casello, insists that the child belongs to the deceased father and passionately defends her position, but even she acknowledges moments of uncertainty due to the complicated relationship timeline. Judge Lauren Lake listens as both women's stories unravel. The court hears about breakups, reconciliations, overlapping relationships, and the confusion caused by emotional storms. It becomes clear that both sides are struggling with grief, regret, trust issues, and unresolved pain. The judge navigates all of this with patience, reminding the courtroom that assumptions and memories cannot replace solid evidence. She refers to legal standards similar to those discussed in academic conversations about jurisprudence and the Adverse Inference in Evidence Act, where missing information must be analyzed carefully without automatically punishing one party. When the DNA test confirms a biological relationship, the courtroom erupts with relief. The aunt collapses in emotional release, crying over the confirmation that she still has a living connection to her brother. The mother reaches out with compassion. Apologies are exchanged, and Judge Lauren Lake once again emphasizes the opportunity for healing. She reminds everyone that the Supreme Court child support guidelines and broader family law exist to protect children, not to prolong conflicts. Throughout all these cases, the judge's courtroom becomes a place where truth acts as both a sword and a balm. Many people regret taking DNA tests not because they fear lies being exposed, but because the truth changes everything: relationships, responsibilities, identities, and futures. The courtroom becomes a living example of how the relationship between law and justice can sometimes be tense, but can also result in profound, life-changing clarity. These stories, some resembling DNA test cheating stories, others echoing adoption stories, show the court as more than a legal setting. It is a place of transformation. As the courtroom settles after the emotional aftermath of the earlier cases, Judge Lauren Lake prepares to hear another set of parties whose lives have also been tied to uncertainty, suspicion, and unresolved conflict. Each person who steps into the courtroom carries their own burdens: broken trust, unanswered questions, unresolved timelines, and conflicting memories that have shaped their narrative long before the court date. This space, guided by the judge's sense of fairness and her understanding of the relationship between law and justice, becomes the only environment where facts can override fear and truth can override long-standing doubt. Judge Lauren Lake is aware of how often families reach this point after months of emotional turmoil. Many confessions in court resemble the tone of raw, unedited podcast conversations, where people finally admit what they were too afraid to say at home. This sometimes echoes like a mix between legal commentary found in the Divorce Course podcast and the introspective honesty heard in Celebrate Recovery testimonies. By the time parties arrive here, avoidance has already exhausted them. All that remains is the need for clarity. In the next situation, the court listens to a family struggling after the sudden loss of a young man whose life ended far too early. His sister, his aunt, and the mother of his possible child stand before the judge, each carrying a different form of grief. The mother, Ms. Casello, looks exhausted from the ongoing emotional pressure of defending her child's connection to a father who is no longer alive to confirm it. The sister, Ms. Sherman, appears stern but broken on the inside, torn between hope and doubt. She is protective of her family but also deeply afraid of forming a bond with a baby who might not belong to her bloodline. The aunt, Ms. Thomas, stands with compassion yet trembling, carrying her own emotional vulnerability while projecting strength. The judge approaches the situation gently, knowing that cases involving deceased fathers carry the heaviest weight and the highest emotional stakes. The absence of the father complicates everything, from the emotional layers to the scientific process of testing. Without a direct sample, DNA test results must rely on a surviving family member. Scientifically, this makes the process more complex. Emotionally, it makes the waiting even harder. Judge Lauren Lake carefully explains that while DNA tests can be deeply painful, because truth changes everything, they are sometimes the only path toward healing. The mother explains her timeline again, how her relationship with the deceased shifted between love, separation, reconciliation, and confusion. She admits her own faults, shares where she tried to move on, and acknowledges the reasons his family may doubt her. She is not defensive but defeated. Judge Lake notes this, recognizing a pattern common in cases where people regret taking DNA tests not because they fear truth, but because they fear losing the emotional connection tied to a child's identity. Ms. Sherman then speaks through tears about her brother, the man she loved, the sibling she lost unexpectedly, and the child she desperately hopes belongs to him. She recounts how he expressed doubts during a rocky period of the relationship, but she also acknowledges that both partners were unfaithful and unstable at that time. Her honesty reveals the complexity of the situation. She does not want to deny the child, but she cannot give the kind of deep emotional investment the baby deserves unless she is certain of the biological connection. As the testimonies unfold, the courtroom becomes the center of two simultaneous battles, one emotional, one evidentiary. The emotional battle is fought in the expressions, tears, and tremors in their voices. The evidentiary battle, however, must rely on legal standards, biological probabilities, and the adverse inference in evidence act, which sometimes requires the court to address missing evidence or incomplete timelines without unfairly punishing either side. Judge Lake understands this, navigating each claim with the objectivity of a seasoned attorney and the empathy of someone who genuinely cares about the outcomes. When the mother speaks, her tone is a mixture of hope, exhaustion, and quiet determination. She insists she is not manipulating anyone and that her child deserves to be claimed by his true family. She shares how she named him, how she struggled through pregnancy alone, and how she never intended to push the deceased father's family away. Her words reflect the emotional loneliness often described in adoption stories, where mothers face uncertainty about who will remain in a child's life. Judge Lake listens attentively, occasionally pausing to ask for clarity. She knows these details matter, not just for legal accuracy, but for emotional validation. When she looks at the aunt, Ms. Thomas, she sees a woman who has been carrying her grief like a weight on her back. The aunt describes how she stepped into the delivery room, how she saw the baby's head during birth, and how she recognized her family's features immediately. Her pain is palpable. Her joy, if the child is confirmed as kin, would be immeasurable, but so would her heartbreak if the results reveal otherwise. The judge gently guides the conversation back to the core issue, the need for truth. She explains that many families come to this courtroom after living in a cloud of confusion for too long. In this moment, she highlights the importance of evidence, not because it is more important than emotion, but because it is the only way the court can protect the child's legal rights. She compares this process to how the Supreme Court child support standards emphasize fact, responsibility, and the child's best interests above all else. As emotions escalate between the mother and the sister, the courtroom becomes tense again. Each woman believes she is protecting the child and honoring the deceased father. Their words clash, not out of hatred but out of fear. The judge intervenes firmly, reminding them that disrespect will not be tolerated in her courtroom. She points out that conflict cannot change DNA, nor can shouting determine the truth. Only patience and evidence can do that. While waiting for the results, Judge Lauren Lake gives a short but powerful reflection that resembles something one might hear on a thoughtful legal podcast. She speaks about how paternity cases reveal the delicate relationship between law and justice. She emphasizes that while the law provides tools, like DNA tests, legal presumptions, evidentiary standards, the emotional reality is much deeper. Justice, she explains, must acknowledge both the scientific truth and the human cost. Finally, the DNA test results arrive. The envelope carried by the court officer becomes the symbol of truth, the most awaited document in the room. The judge takes a moment before reading, giving everyone space to breathe, to prepare, and to steady themselves. She reads the results with calm authority, confirming a 97.8% probability that the child is biologically related to the father's family. The explosion of emotion is immediate. Relief floods the room. The aunt collapses in tears. The sister cries openly, apologizing for her doubts while still acknowledging the pain that caused them. The mother's shoulders finally relax as she accepts the validation she has been waiting for since the day her child was born. In this moment, the courtroom becomes a sanctuary, not for conflict but for healing. Judge Lake reminds everyone that this result is a beginning, not an ending. She emphasizes that family does not form overnight. Trust must be rebuilt. Stability must be created. She explains that in many full episodes of cases like this, families leave the courtroom with the truth but still need time to adjust to what that truth means. She encourages them to move forward with empathy, honor the deceased father's memory, and step into the child's future together. As the families leave, the judge reflects aloud, more to the courtroom than to any individual, about how these cases continue to show her the complexity of human relationships. She mentions that if these testimonies were ever compiled into a podcast, listeners would be stunned by how real, raw, and emotionally layered they are. They demonstrate not only the heartbreak that brings people to court, but also the resilience that allows them to continue fighting for clarity, justice, and the well-being of their children.